They gathered around her at dusk, forming a circle that felt more like a trap than a ceremony. The air was heavy with incense, smoke coiling through the compound as though it, too, wished to escape what was about to happen. She watched her family, or what she once believed to be family, standing stiffly, their eyes avoiding hers, each one pretending this was necessary. But beneath their forced expressions she saw something darker: greed. They were not doing this for tradition, for culture, or for honor. They were doing it for gold. Heavy, glittering gold. And the men who had come for her voice, wrapped in cloaks the color of night, waited silently with bowls carved from bones and ropes stained with old magic. She tried to speak, to ask why, to ask how they could give away something so sacred, but her father raised a hand sharply, as if her voice already belonged to someone else. Her sister avoided her gaze entirely, her trembling hands betraying guilt even as she stood firm. Her stepmother watched her with cold satisfaction, as though this moment was long overdue. In their eyes, her voice had always been a threat, too strong, too influential, too capable of drawing people to her. Her songs soothed conflicts, her words gathered crowds, her truths unsettled lies. The clan elders had once praised her gift. But gifts, when misunderstood, often become targets. The traders approached her, their footsteps silent despite the gravel beneath them. They smelled of damp caves and forbidden places, and when they lifted their heads she saw no warmth in their eyes, only hunger. Not for her body, not for her soul, but for her voice, the most precious thing she possessed. One of them lifted a thin curved blade and traced it lightly in the air, whispering words she could not understand. Another held a bowl close to her lips as if preparing to catch something invisible. She wanted to run, scream, fight, anything, but her feet felt nailed to the ground, held not by magic but by the betrayal of those she had loved. She looked at her father one last time, hoping for a change of heart, a flicker of regret, anything that proved he still cared. But he only nodded at the traders, signaling them to proceed. Her heart cracked. She opened her mouth to protest, to beg him to stop, but the moment her lips parted, one trader snapped his fingers. A shock sliced through her throat, sharp and cold, like invisible claws ripping at her voice. She gasped, clutching her neck, feeling the air leave her in a trembling gasp. The traders chanted louder, circling her, drawing symbols on the ground with ash and crushed herbs. Her voice rose from her throat not as sound, but as shimmering mist, pulled out against her will, gleaming like trapped moonlight. She collapsed to her knees, breathless, watching the traders seal her voice inside a golden vessel. The family accepted a bag of gold in exchange, heavy enough to shake the earth, shining enough to blind them to what they had done. She tried to scream, to cry, but only silence emerged. Her voice was gone. Not muted, not hidden, gone. Taken. Sold. And as the traders disappeared into the night, carrying her stolen power with them, her family turned away without a single glance. They believed the deal was complete. They believed she was powerless. They believed her silence made her safe. They were wrong. Her silence had only awakened what they feared most. The days that followed felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried. Silence clung to her like a second skin, an unwelcome shadow that followed her everywhere she went. At first, she kept touching her throat, hoping that maybe the ritual had failed, that perhaps a whisper might still rise. But every time she opened her mouth, the same emptiness greeted her. No hum. No breathy syllable. Nothing. Her voice was gone as though it had never existed at all. The village reacted quickly to her silence, some with pity, others with mockery, and most with indifference. Without her words, she became easy to overlook, easy to dismiss. People who once asked for her advice now walked past her as though she were part of the scenery. Children who adored her songs now stared with wide, confused eyes before being pulled away by their parents. Even the wind seemed cruel, brushing past her ears with whispers she could no longer respond to. Her family, the ones who had sold her voice, treated her differently too. They spoke louder around her, as though assuming silence had made her deaf. They insulted her openly, secure in the belief that she could not defend herself. Her stepmother no longer pretended to hide her disdain. She often smirked when their eyes met, pleased with the quiet girl she had created. Her father avoided her gaze entirely, haunted perhaps by guilt or simply unwilling to confront the consequences of his greed. Her sister carried on as if nothing had happened, but her nervous glances revealed a guilt that weighed heavily beneath her calm facade. But losing her voice changed more than just how others treated her. It changed how she saw everything. In silence, life sharpened. With no words to speak, she learned to listen, not just with her ears but with her whole being. She noticed things she had once overlooked. The way people's faces twitched when lying, the way footsteps sounded heavier when someone carried secrets, the way shadows stretched longer around certain individuals as though truth itself avoided them. Without needing to respond, she observed freely. Every whispered argument, every hurried exchange, every hidden gesture became a thread she followed. Humiliation became a familiar visitor. Sometimes villagers laughed when she tried to communicate with gestures, other times they dismissed her entirely. But each moment of insult only strengthened her resolve. In being stripped of her voice, she discovered something unexpected: clarity. She saw the world as it truly was, not as people pretended it to be. Silence gave her a new kind of power, one that allowed her to blend, to watch, to understand without being noticed. The same people who mocked her forgot she could still hear. They assumed silence made her harmless. But in her quiet world, she was learning. She was gathering truths. She was piecing together secrets they thought she would never discover. And though her voice was gone, something deeper inside her awakened. An awareness, a quiet strength, a growing certainty that silence was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of something far greater. Nights became the only time she felt truly alive. The world quieted, shadows softened, and the chaos of the day faded into the distance. It was in this darkness that she first heard it, so faint she thought it was a memory. A soft hum like breath caught between worlds. At first, she froze, unsure if it was her imagination playing cruel tricks on her. But then it came again, delicate, distant, trembling like a frightened heartbeat. It sounded like her. Or rather, like the echo of what she used to be. She sat upright on her sleeping mat, her pulse racing. The sound drifted through the cracks in the mud walls, swirling around her like a forgotten melody. She pressed her hand to her throat instinctively, but it remained silent. The voice did not come from her body. It came from somewhere else, somewhere far yet somehow close. She closed her eyes to listen, every sense sharpened by her enforced quiet. The whisper grew clearer, barely forming syllables, as though trying to push its way through layers of darkness. It called her name in a fractured tone, familiar yet eerie. She felt a chill run across her skin. Unable to speak back, she rose slowly and stepped outside. The village was asleep, save for a few lanterns flickering from distant huts. The moon hung low, casting shadows that stretched like fingers across the earth. And again the whisper came, not from the sky, not from the ground, but from everywhere and nowhere, echoing like a trapped spirit seeking escape. She followed it instinctively. Her bare feet made no sound as she walked, and because she made no sound, she felt as though the night itself accepted her presence. The echo led her behind the house, past the old well and toward the tree line. It grew louder with each step, though never fully clear, as if it were struggling to break free from an unseen prison. She stopped beneath a cluster of trees, their leaves rustling with secrets. The whisper circled her, brushing past her ears, as gentle as breath and as sorrowful as a lament. She realized then, her stolen voice was not gone. It was somewhere, held, trapped, bound by the same greed that had silenced her. The echoes grew urgent when she moved too far from the trees, as if guiding her back each time she strayed. It didn't speak words she could recognize, but the intention was unmistakable. It wanted her to follow. It wanted her to know. It wanted her to reclaim it. That night she barely slept. The echo lingered even after she returned to her mat, fading in and out like a dream refusing to settle. But with every whisper she felt a growing connection, a thread pulling her toward something hidden. She pressed her palm to her chest and felt her heart beat faster, aligning with the rhythm of the distant voice. Her breath steady, her eyes focused in the darkness, she understood that something greater was at play. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. Whenever the village slept, the echo returned. Sometimes it called her name, other times it mimicked the soft lullabies she used to hum. Once she could swear it cried. Another time it laughed faintly as though remembering joy. Each sound filled her with a mixture of longing and determination. The whispers were a map, guiding her not with lines but with sound. They drew her back to the trees, deeper each night, as though the forest hid the truth she needed. Her silence had made her invisible, but these echoes made her dangerous. Her stolen voice was trying to return to her, and in the darkness she began to understand. Silence was never the end. It was the path toward the greatest reckoning her oppressors could never imagine. The deeper she walked into the forbidden hallways beneath the chieftain's compound, the heavier the air became, as if the darkness itself wanted to warn her to turn back. But she moved with the guidance of the faint echo, her own stolen voice, pulling her like an invisible thread. It tugged at her ribs, urging her forward through winding tunnels carved long ago and forgotten by the living. She found a rusted iron door half buried under thick moss. The whisper grew sharp as if panicking. She pressed her ear to the metal and felt warmth pulsing from the other side, like the heartbeat of something imprisoned. With trembling fingers she pushed, and the door groaned open, releasing a gust of cold air mixed with something strange, an energy that prickled across her skin. Inside was a cavern-like chamber illuminated by dim blue flames locked inside stone bowls. The sight before her froze her breath. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of golden gourds hung from the ceiling by thin threads of woven spirit fibers. Each gourd glowed faintly, and from each came the softest of murmurs, layered whispers like distant waves colliding. The sound was haunting, beautiful, suffocating. It was the sound of stolen voices. Her knees weakened. Voices of women. Of children. Of elders. Voices that once sang lullabies, shouted warnings, prayed for rain. Voices stripped away and sold for gold. And somewhere among them, hers. She stepped forward, the floor echoing under her bare feet. A sharp twitch seized her chest, guiding her left. She followed the pole, weaving through hanging gourds. Some flickered as if sensing her presence. Others cried softly, trapped in unending pleas. She pressed her hand to her heart, her voice tugged harder. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal made of dark stone, carved with symbols she recognized from the night of the ritual. The symbols her family pretended not to understand, the ones etched into the bowl they used to steal her voice. Her gaze narrowed. They had known exactly what they were doing. And they had lied. On the pedestal lay scrolls and ledgers. Her trembling hands opened them. Each page was filled with names, dates, amounts of gold, and symbols marking the type of voice stolen. Some were marked prophetic. Others healing. Others powerful. Her breath stilled when she saw her own name, her voice labeled as rare. Those who traded in voices valued hers highly. Then she noticed something else. Her family's signatures. Not just their initials, full, deliberate signatures. Her mother's graceful curve. Her uncle's sharp strokes. Even her brother's mark, bold and unashamed. They had not been pressured. They had willingly sold her voice. The ledger revealed even more. This was not just a family betrayal. It was a vast conspiracy stretching across villages, clans, and secret councils. Rulers hungry for wealth traded away the voices of anyone they feared would rise against them. The gold they gained funded their power, while the stolen voices were stored, sold, weaponized, or silenced forever. The cavern was not a prison. It was a marketplace of stolen power. Her pulse hammered in her ears. Her legs trembled with both rage and grief. She reached for the gourd glowing brightest, the one tugging at her from inside. Without hesitation, she wrapped her fingers around it. The moment her skin touched the surface, a shock wave of warmth shot up her arm. Her stolen voice recognized her. The gourd vibrated gently, humming with longing, fear, and hope. She pressed it to her chest, and for a heartbeat, her voice whispered inside her mind, soft, muffled, "I am here. I never left you." Her eyes burned with tears. But the chamber began to shift. The blue flames flickered. The murmurs grew louder, frantic. Something or someone had sensed her presence. Footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind her, many approaching fast. She clutched the gourd tighter. This was no longer just about reclaiming what was stolen from her. This was about exposing the empire built on silence. And now, with the truth in her hands, she knew exactly what she had to do: destroy the system that thrived on stolen voices and make sure none would ever be silenced again. Holding the glowing gourd against her chest, she felt a warmth she had not known since the day her voice was taken. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat trying to sync with her own. The cavern trembled with distant footsteps, but for a moment everything faded. The walls, the fear, even the shadows, and all she could hear was a soft hum, a vibration deep within her bones. Then the memories began. Not like ordinary memories, but visions, rippling and alive, unfolding around her as though time itself had decided to remember for her. She saw herself as a child sitting beneath the giant irako tree, humming to injured birds brought to her by other children. Her voice then had been small and gentle, yet even the trembling wings stilled when she sang. The birds healed faster than nature intended, and villagers whispered that her tone carried something ancient. Another memory surged forward, her voice cutting through a heated argument at the riverbank. Two families locked in a bitter dispute fell silent the moment she spoke a single word: enough. The word did not echo, it settled, heavy and warm, sinking into the hearts of everyone around. Truth spilled easily after that, confessions rising like bubbles from the depths of a river. What had been hidden came out, what had been twisted straightened. Her voice did not simply command, it revealed. A third vision washed over her. She stood beside her grandmother's mat as the old woman trembled with a fever. No herbs helped, no healer succeeded. But when she pressed her lips to her grandmother's ear and whispered a prayer, something shifted. The fever broke by morning. Her grandmother had grasped her hand, eyes wide with recognition, and whispered, "Your voice carries the ancestors." As the visions thickened, she found herself floating in a world of echoes, her own voice weaving through time like a river winding through a forest. She saw rituals older than memory, circles of priestesses whose voices summoned rain, calmed storms, or exposed lies. Their throats glowed with the same golden light now pulsing inside the gourd she held. Her voice was not born randomly. It was inherited, passed through a lineage of women who carried truth as a birthright. But then she saw something else, something painful. Her mother's face, not cold and greedy as she knew her now, but young and terrified. She stood before a council of masked rulers who offered her a choice: surrender her daughter's voice to them, or watch her entire bloodline be erased from the village records, stripped of land, name, and protection. Her mother's hands shook as she signed the agreement, tears streaking down her cheeks. She did not want to betray her. She had been forced. The vision shifted again, showing her uncle counting gold with satisfaction, and she realized he had been the one who convinced her mother to accept the council's offer. He had delivered her like a sacrifice. Her breath shuddered. Then came a final vision, not of the past, but of what her voice could do when it returned fully to her. She saw herself standing in the middle of the village square, speaking a single word. And that word rippled outward, shattering illusions like fragile shells. The corrupt council crumbled beneath the weight of exposed truth. The merchants of stolen voices screamed as the spirits they had imprisoned broke free. Her people lifted their heads, hearing not just a sound but a force that awakened something dormant inside them: courage, clarity, resistance. Her voice was not meant only to soothe or heal. It was meant to liberate, to awaken, to destroy oppression and rebuild justice where silence had been forced. As the visions dimmed, she found herself back in the cavern, her knees touching the cold floor. But something inside her had changed, grown sharper, deeper. The footsteps in the tunnel grew clearer, closer, filling the space with approaching danger. Still she did not rise in fear. She rose in purpose. The gourd glowed brilliantly now, lighting the chamber with golden fire. The voices around her stirred, recognizing her as one of their own. Some hummed with hope, others trembled with desperation. They knew what she was. They knew what she could do. Her voice, when restored, would not return as it was. It would return stronger. Because it now carried the strength of every stolen voice around her, every whisper of pain, every cry for justice, every song cut short. She felt it gathering inside her, even before she opened the gourd. The ground vibrated as the chamber doors began to shake, the abductors or traitors or guards arriving to stop her, to silence her permanently. But she was done being silent. Her voice had been born from a lineage that refused to disappear. It had healed, revealed, transformed. And when she finally spoke again, it would not merely echo. It would shatter. It would awaken. It would burn through lies like a rising sun cutting through mist. She pressed the glowing gourd to her throat. The warmth seeped into her skin, sinking deeper, merging with her breath. Her voice, the power she once had, the power they feared, was no longer lost. It was returning. And when it did, nothing built on stolen silence would stand. She had barely stepped away from the glowing chamber when a sharp crack echoed through the tunnels. Footsteps, urgent and heavy, stomping toward her. She pressed herself against the stone wall, heart racing, still clutching the warm gourd beneath her cloak. The voices within it whispered warnings, soft and panicked, urging her to hide, to flee, to be careful. But before she could move, a hand shot out of the darkness and seized her wrist. Her breath froze. She braced for a blow, but the grip loosened just enough to signal it wasn't meant to hurt. A figure pulled her into a narrow passageway between two slabs of stone. A torch flickered, revealing the weathered, deeply lined face of one of the council guards, an older man with gray creeping into his beard and eyes sharp enough to see through the dark. She recognized him faintly. He had been there the day they stole her voice. His presence now should have filled her with dread, but something in the way he watched her, steady, pained, and strangely protective, kept her still. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered, glancing toward the tunnel where other guards' voices grew louder. "If they catch you by that chamber, they'll finish what they started." She swallowed, unable to answer, but her eyes demanded the question. Why are you helping me? He sighed, a sound heavy with guilt. Because I knew what they did to you was wrong. I knew it then and I know it now. His gaze dropped to the faint glow leaking from beneath her cloak. And because I remember what your voice could do. Her pulse quickened. No one besides her grandmother had ever spoken openly about her gift. Most whispered about it in fear, in jealousy, or in ignorance, but not with understanding. The guard continued, his voice trembling. I saw what happened the day you calmed the storm. You were only a child, barely tall enough to look over the river's edge, yet when the winds howled and the waters rose, you spoke, and the river obeyed. His eyes glistened with something like awe. You didn't just soothe the storm. You commanded it. And that terrified them. She stared at him, stunned, as the memories flickered inside her. She remembered that day vaguely, the roaring wind, the rising water, the fear, but she had never fully understood what she had done. The man leaned closer. Your voice was the kind of power rulers fear. The kind that can't be bought, controlled, or bargained with. So they sold it instead. His jaw clenched. I was ordered to hold you down during the ritual, he whispered, shame thick in every syllable. I refused. They punished me for it, took my rank, my land, my family's inheritance. But I would do it again. He met her eyes, determination returning. I have waited for this moment. For you to return. For you to take back what is yours. She felt a tightness in her throat, not from the absence of her voice, but from the storm of emotion rising in her chest. She wanted to ask him so many things, to demand answers, but words still refused her. Instead, she let the gourd shift in her hands, its glow brightening just enough for him to see what she carried. His eyes widened. You found it, he breathed. The vessel that holds your voice. She nodded. For a long moment he stared, reverence softening his expression. Then he stepped aside, revealing a hidden doorway carved between the stones. Follow me. There are paths only the old guards know. I'll take you past the patrols. But you must be careful. Once they realize what you've recovered, they will hunt you without mercy. She hesitated, studying him. Trust was a dangerous luxury in these halls. As if sensing her doubt, he spoke again, low and urgent. Child, I may not have protected you then, but let me protect you now. Your voice was meant for more than silence. And I swear on the spirits of my ancestors, I will help you reclaim what they feared. The voices inside the gourd hummed in approval, their soft echoes warming her chest. She stepped forward. For the first time since her voice was taken, she wasn't alone. The passageway the old guard led her through twisted downward into deeper chambers she had never known existed beneath the Empire's palace. The walls grew older, carved with symbols forgotten by most, and the air thickened with the weight of ancient secrets. Her fingers tightened around the glowing gourd that held her voice, the whispers inside steady and warm as though urging her forward. The guard walked ahead with slow, deliberate steps, glancing back occasionally to ensure she was still with him. When they reached a wide stone door engraved with spiraling patterns, he pressed his palm against a faded crest. The door groaned open. Inside lay a dim hall filled with shelves, scrolls, clay tablets, and leather-bound tomes stretching from floor to ceiling. Dust drifted through the air like sleep that had never been disturbed. The guard lowered his torch. This is the archive of oaths, he murmured. Only the royal families and council leaders know of it. This is where they keep the contracts that bind the empire to power. She stepped inside cautiously, feeling the heaviness of the place press on her chest. Her eyes roamed the shelves, searching for something she hadn't yet fully imagined but instinctively knew existed. The voices inside the gourd fluttered restlessly, their whispers growing sharper, almost urgent. She realized they were guiding her. The guard noticed. Your voice remembers what your mind cannot, he said quietly. Follow it. She approached a row of scrolls bound with red string. As she reached out, the gourd pulsed, glowing brighter. She removed one scroll and unrolled it slowly, her hands trembling. The parchment crackled with age. Written in ink as dark as midnight were lines of binding words, words forged in blood, sealed with a ritual that connected her very voice to the empire's prosperity. Her heart pounded as she read. When the child with the river-touched voice is silenced, the land shall flourish. When her voice is restored, the empire shall tremble. She felt the air around her change, grow colder, heavier. The gourd grew hotter against her chest, the whispers inside suddenly fierce, full of rage and sorrow. She scanned the rest of the parchment. It told a story she had never heard, one older than her family's greed. Her voice had been prophesied generations before she was born. Her voice, her truth, was meant to balance the land, reveal corruption, and expose rulers who strayed from justice. Those in power feared this prophecy so deeply that they created a pact. Silence her and their empire would flourish. Silence her and wealth would continue flowing into their hands. Silence her and no truth could threaten them. The guard watched her expression tighten as she read. "That is why they sold your voice," he said gravely. "Not only for the gold. Not only out of greed. They did it to protect their power. Your voice is the only thing that could shatter it." She scanned the shelves again and found more scrolls, one detailing the ritual that trapped her voice in a vessel, another describing how her silence fed strength to the throne, another outlining the consequences if her voice ever escaped and returned to her. "If her voice rises again, the empire's walls shall crack. The throne shall tilt. All secrets buried in its soil shall surface." Her breath escaped her in a shaky exhale. Every lie, every cruelty, every injustice propping up the empire, it was all tied to her silence. They had built their strength on her muteness. Her stolen voice wasn't just a treasure, it was the foundation stone of their false prosperity. The guard stepped closer. "Now you understand why they fear you. Why even one word from you could topple everything they've built." His voice softened. "They knew that your voice compels truth, that it awakens what is hidden, that no deception can stand when you speak. You were born with a gift meant to cleanse the land, not serve an empire of greed." Her hands shook as she unrolled another scroll. This one was shorter, written with a shaky hand. It was signed by her own mother. "For my daughter, whose voice holds the dawn. Forgive me for failing to protect you. If you are reading this, it means your strength has found a way back to you. Speak once, child, and the false kings will crumble." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the parchment to her chest, feeling the warmth of the gourd pulse in sync with her heartbeat. Her mother had known. Her mother had tried to warn her. Her mother had believed in her power when she herself barely remembered it. The guard placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The empire was built on contracts of fear and silence. You are the loophole, the truth they could not erase. When your voice returns, the contracts break. Every oath becomes dust." She looked around the room once more, realizing she stood in the center of the empire's greatest vulnerability. Every shelf, every scroll, every binding oath leaned on a single foundation, her continued silence. But she was silent no more. She closed the scrolls with trembling hands and held the glowing gourd tight. Her voice could crumble an empire. And they had no idea she was coming. They thought she was still wandering the outer corridors of the palace. They thought she was alone, voiceless, broken. They never imagined she would find her way into the deeper halls where only council members walked. And they certainly never imagined she would hear the things they whispered in fear. She pressed herself against the cold stone wall, hidden behind a carved pillar as the council leaders gathered in a dimly lit chamber just beyond her hiding place. Their torches flickered nervously, shadows shaking across their tense faces as though even the fire feared what they were about to discuss. She recognized the High Chancellor's sharp voice first. He was the one who had negotiated the deal that stole her voice, the one who had smiled proudly when the gold was delivered. "Her vessel is missing," he hissed, pacing rapidly across the chamber. The voice jar was removed from the vault. "Someone breached our protections." Another council member slammed his fist onto the table. "Do you understand what this means? If she ever speaks again, truly speaks, the contracts dissolve. Every pact we swore with the traitors, every blessing tied to the empire's prosperity, gone." A third voice, trembling and thin, whispered, "The land depends on her silence. The moment she utters even a single word, the empire will fracture. Our streets, our borders, our armies, they will falter." She held her breath, her heart pounding loud enough she feared they would hear it. The gourd pressed against her chest pulsed gently, as though reminding her that the very thing they feared was inside her reach. The eldest councilwoman spoke next, her tone cold and filled with dread. "We should have destroyed her along with her voice. Taking the voice was not enough. A living vessel is a danger. She carries the prophecy in her bones. Destroying her would have broken the pact." Another snapped. "The traitors demanded she live so her silence would feed their power. If she dies, the empire weakens. If she speaks, the empire falls. We are trapped." The High Chancellor groaned, gripping his hair. "We must find her before she finds the jar. We must ensure she never, ever, recovers her voice." Her stomach tightened. They were too late. Another councilman leaned forward, voice low. "What if she already knows? What if she's discovered the archive of oaths? What if she understands what her voice truly is?" The chamber fell silent for a long, heavy breath. "Then, if she speaks," the High Chancellor whispered, The truth we buried will rise. The lies we built our power on will turn to dust. Every secret, every hidden crime, her voice will expose all of it. She felt the fear ripple through the room, thick and tangible. These were men and women who ruled without question, people who once believed themselves untouchable. Now they trembled at the mere possibility of her whisper. "That girl must be found," the eldest councilwoman said sharply. "Her silence is the only thing standing between us and ruin." Another added, voice quivering, "And if we fail to contain her, then the empire will crumble from the inside." Their fear settled like frost along her spine, but instead of weakening her, it strengthened her resolve. She finally understood the truth: she was not powerless. She was the threat. She was the storm they could not control. And this time they were right to fear her. The path ahead was neither marked nor safe. She stepped carefully over gnarled roots and broken stones, each footfall echoing softly in the dense forest. The gourd pressed to her chest pulsed with faint warmth, as if urging her onward, guiding her through paths only she could sense. The whispers from within, her stolen voice trapped for so long, rose in tiny, urgent murmurs, threading through her mind and heart. They were fragments of themselves, fragments of power and memory, reminding her of everything she had lost and everything she had yet to reclaim. The high trees above formed a canopy so thick that sunlight barely touched the forest floor, leaving the world in greenish twilight. Strange sounds echoed, bird calls, rustling leaves, and the distant cry of creatures she did not recognize. She paused often, listening, feeling, attuning herself to the land and its currents. Her mother's lessons came back to her. The forest is alive, the forest remembers. Every step is witnessed, every breath counts, every decision ripples outward. She had been trained for this without knowing it, prepared in silence. At the edge of a ruined village she paused again. The remnants of collapsed homes, charred walls, and overgrown paths whispered of forgotten histories, stories erased by those who feared truth. Here the first trials awaited. Shadows moved unnaturally, and she felt the eyes of unseen observers tracking her every movement. Some were spirits of the lost, the echoes of ancestors who had once protected her line. Some were the emissaries of those who had stolen her voice. The forest itself seemed to test her courage and resolve. With every step, she imagined her voice calling out, breaking chains that had held her and others in silence for generations. Yet she restrained herself, letting the whispers guide her in measured patience. She reached a clearing where ruins of an old temple rose from the overgrowth. The stones were worn smooth, inscribed with symbols she recognized from her mother's teachings. The gourd glowed stronger as she approached, humming faintly with anticipation. This was the site marked in the archive of oaths, the place where the ritual that bound her voice had first been performed. Her pulse quickened. She knew that reclaiming her voice meant confronting not only physical obstacles but spiritual ones as well. The spirits guarding the temple would not yield to arrogance, nor would they allow her voice to return without proving its worthiness. Careful and deliberate, she crossed the threshold, feeling a weight in the air that pressed against her chest. The whispers swelled, urging her forward while warning her of dangers. Runes on the walls seemed to shift as she passed, revealing hidden pathways and doorways only visible to someone attuned to the power of the voice. She followed them, weaving through passages that twisted and turned like a living labyrinth. Every corner held illusions, tests of resolve, and memories conjured by the binding magic that had stolen her voice. She endured visions of herself powerless, of her family's empire thriving on her silence, of herself trapped forever. She met each vision with courage, each shadow with calm, letting the echoes within guide her. Finally she reached the central chamber. The air vibrated with power, thick and humming, resonating in her bones. There, on a stone pedestal, lay the vessel containing her voice. It shimmered like liquid glass, humming softly, reflecting the faint torchlight in colors that shifted like fire and water combined. Her heart leapt, and she felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the weight of her lineage, her mother's protection, and the destiny that had been denied to her. Kneeling, she extended her hands toward the vessel, letting the warmth flow through her fingertips. The whispers inside her chest swelled in anticipation, eager to reunite with their rightful body. But before she could touch the vessel, a shadow detached itself from the wall. It was not human but a guardian spirit bound to protect the ritual. Its eyes glowed with ancient light, and its voice, though silent in human words, pressed into her mind. Prove your worth. Show courage, restraint, and understanding. Only then shall the stolen voice return. She nodded, steadying her breath, her heart steady despite the fear and anticipation. She raised her hands, letting the gourd's warmth guide her thoughts. She remembered every insult, every betrayal, every moment her silence had been used against her. Yet she tempered her emotions with clarity. With one careful, deliberate gesture, she touched the vessel. The world shifted. Energy surged through her. The gourd dissolved, and with it, the barriers that had imprisoned her voice. The whispers became words, full, powerful, resonant, reverberating through the chamber and deep into her bones. She spoke just a single word, and felt the rush of power, the reclamation of what was hers. The shadows recoiled, the guardian bowed in acknowledgement, and the temple itself seemed to hum in approval. Her voice had returned. Not a whisper, not a fragment, but her true voice, pure, unyielding, unstoppable. She stood, trembling but victorious. The journey had been long, the trials daunting, but she had reached the heart of her power. Every step, every struggle, every moment of silence had prepared her for this. And now, nothing in the empire, no deception, no pact, no fear could withstand the sound of her words. The moment she reclaimed her voice, it was as though the world exhaled in relief. A warmth spread from her chest outward, filling every corner of the chamber with a resonance she had never known. The whispers that had guided her, that had accompanied her in silence and in darkness, solidified into sound, pure, resonant, and alive. She had expected the return to be gradual, tentative, but it arrived in a flood, like a river breaking through a long-sealed dam. A single syllable escaped her lips, a humming note that carried the weight of her lineage, her suffering, and her destiny. It glowed in the air before her, a living essence that shimmered with light and color, twisting like smoke and fire in a dance only she could command. The chamber responded to her voice. Stones vibrated softly underfoot, ancient runes along the walls pulsed in harmony, and the air seemed to shimmer with acknowledgement. The spirit guardian, who had tested her courage and patience, watched silently, its luminescent eyes reflecting pride and recognition. She realized that her voice was not simply sound, it was power, legacy, and authority all woven into one. Every word, every note, contained layers of energy, capable of revealing truths, awakening forces, and overturning deception. The whispers from before were now full sentences, full chords, echoing with clarity, as though her very essence had been amplified. Her first words were careful, deliberate, yet thrilling. She spoke of the journey she had endured, the silencing, the betrayal, the trials through the forest, and the reclaiming of her power. Each phrase seemed to ripple outward, touching the stones, the shadows, and the very air of the temple. The humming orb that had guided her before seemed to resonate with her, brightening as if it recognized that its bond had been restored. She felt a connection deeper than physical presence. A line of energy stretching from her chest through the chamber, linking past, present, and future. Her thoughts turned to those who had stolen her voice, to the empire that had prospered from her silence. She could feel the power of truth within her words now, capable of piercing lies and shattering false authority. The once invisible currents of influence she had sensed while voiceless now surged visibly around her, responding to the sound of her voice. She realized the empire's wealth and structure had depended upon her silence. Every lie and every manipulated decree trembled under the weight of the power she had reclaimed. The energy coursing through her also brought clarity. Her voice did more than echo, it illuminated. Hidden doors, concealed runes, and secret pathways within the temple glowed briefly, revealing knowledge that had been buried and obscured. She understood that the chamber, the guardian, and the humming orb were all tools to test, strengthen, and restore her authority. Nothing about her silence had been random. It was preparation, a trial of endurance, perception, patience, and inner strength. Now that she had passed, the forces that had once been against her seemed to bend in recognition. Yet the power was not meant for arrogance or revenge alone. She could feel its pulse like a heartbeat, guiding her toward balance and justice. Her voice carried responsibility, to right wrongs, to reclaim what had been stolen, and to ensure that the empire, the family, and those who had been oppressed could now exist in alignment with truth. Every syllable she produced vibrated with intention, and even unspoken thoughts seemed to hum with energy, connecting her mind and her spirit in a harmony she had never experienced. She tested the limits of her regained sound. A soft hum stirred the air, a low, deliberate word caused the light in the chamber to respond like water catching sunlight. Every intonation seemed to awaken something ancient, as if the ancestors themselves were acknowledging her return. The humming orb aligned with her voice, orbiting around her and shining with a brilliance that mirrored the surging energy in her chest. She realized she had not merely recovered what was lost, she had surpassed it. Her voice was now a living instrument of power, wisdom, and destiny. For the first time in years she felt complete. The isolation, the humiliation, the years of forced silence, they all contributed to this moment. She could speak, command, heal, reveal, and protect. The chamber no longer felt empty or threatening. It pulsed with life, echoing her regained voice and validating her existence. Every note, every syllable seemed to affirm that she was not powerless. Her voice had returned in its fullest form, vibrant and uncontainable, capable of shattering empires and illuminating truths that had long been buried. Standing there, she breathed deeply, letting the hum of her voice merge with the hum of the orb, the chamber, and her own heartbeat. She was ready. The world outside the temple awaited, and with her regained power, she would step forward, not as the silenced girl of yesterday, but as the woman whose voice could change everything. She returned to the heart of the empire, her steps confident, her chest humming with the resonance of her regained voice. The streets that once felt cold and oppressive now seemed to acknowledge her presence, bending subtly under the weight of what she carried within. Courtiers, rulers, and the greedy family members who had once silenced her glanced at her with curiosity, unease, and disbelief, sensing something extraordinary in the air. Her eyes scanned the grand hall, taking in the gilded walls, the towering pillars, and the intricate tapestries that had long masked deceit and manipulation. Everything was in place, yet fragile, ready to collapse under a single spark of truth. She did not speak at first. She let the silence stretch, letting the tension build, letting the air itself grow heavy with expectation. Then she drew a deep breath, feeling the energy of her lineage, the echoes of the voices trapped and lost, the guidance of ancestors, and the power restored by the humming orb coalesce into one singular focus. She opened her mouth and the word came, not tentative, not shy, not hesitant, but deliberate, charged with centuries of authority and justice. It was a single word, a name, a declaration, a key that unlocked everything hidden. The syllable rang out, resonant and unyielding, reverberating through walls, floors, and hearts. The empire trembled. False decrees etched in ink cracked and fell away. Lies that had held the court in submission for years shattered like brittle glass. Curses whispered in secrecy and fear dissolved into nothingness, their bindings broken by the simple power of truth spoken aloud. Those who had built their fortunes and influence on her silence staggered, unable to deny the reality now exposed. Hidden accounts of treachery, stolen wealth, manipulated alliances, and unjust punishments surfaced in plain sight, as if the word itself carried the ability to illuminate every corner of deceit. Her family members who had once smiled at her voicelessness were struck dumb, powerless against the force they had underestimated. The rulers, courtiers, and opportunists who had thrived under her silence could only watch as their empire unraveled, their schemes revealed, and their authority nullified by the one word they had never expected. It was more than a word, it was judgment, revelation, and liberation rolled into one, a single syllable capable of undoing years of manipulation and cruelty. The people of the empire, witnesses to the collapse, gasped, murmured, and finally recognized what had been hidden for so long. Justice long postponed surged forward. They saw that the girl who had been silenced, humiliated, and oppressed possessed a power far greater than they had imagined. One word had dismantled the foundations of greed and corruption, leaving behind clarity, truth, and the promise of a new order. As the echoes of that word faded, a profound stillness filled the hall. The empire that had relied on her silence was no more. She stood tall, her voice restored, her power undeniable, and her destiny fulfilled. The weight of years of oppression lifted, and with it, the certainty that nothing built on lies and fear could withstand the force of a single truth spoken with courage and authority. The aftermath of her single word reverberated long after the echoes had faded from the grand hall. News of the empire's collapse, wrought by a single utterance, spread like wildfire through towns, villages, and distant lands. Merchants whispered it in market squares, travelers carried the story from one village to another, and storytellers wove it into song and tale. She, once voiceless, had become a beacon of courage, a living testament to the idea that power built on oppression was always fragile, and that even the smallest voice, when reclaimed, could shatter the strongest chains. Her name became synonymous with justice. Mothers spoke it to their children at night, not as a warning but as inspiration. Fathers recounted her story to sons and daughters as a lesson in patience, vigilance, and the importance of truth. The young and old alike marveled at how someone who had been silenced, humiliated, and reduced to invisibility had risen to dismantle a whole empire without raising an army, without wielding a sword, and without shedding blood. The empire's archives, once filled with deceitful records, were replaced with accounts of her courage and the events that had reshaped history. Scholars and scribes traveled from faraway lands to study the collapse and to understand the power that lay in a voice restored, a mind awakened, and a spirit unbroken. She did not seek titles or crowns. Her victory was not about dominion but about justice, clarity, and the affirmation that no one could own or suppress truth indefinitely. She moved quietly among the people, helping rebuild communities and fostering trust where fear had once reigned. Villagers and city folk alike came to see her, not as a ruler in the conventional sense, but as a custodian of moral authority, a living example that courage could transform the seemingly impossible into reality. In each conversation, in each council she attended, and in each act of guidance she offered, she reminded people of the value of listening, observing, and standing firm against oppression. The empire she had dismantled slowly reformed, but under entirely new principles. The new leaders recognized that the collapse had been not just political but moral, a failure born of greed, deceit, and silencing of voices. They codified laws ensuring that no one could be deprived of expression, that justice could not be delayed by wealth or influence, and that truth would be honored above all. Her influence shaped this transformation as she spoke at gatherings, trained emissaries, and advised on matters of governance, not through command but through wisdom. Those who had once betrayed her, enslaved her voice, or sought to profit from her silence were left with a complicated legacy. Some fled, unable to reconcile their past deeds with the new reality. Others attempted to rebuild, seeking forgiveness and redemption, though none could deny the moral weight of her actions or the inevitability of the empire's reckoning. Her family, once complicit in her silencing, came to understand the magnitude of their mistake. Some reconciled with her, humbled by the lesson they had learned, that greed and cruelty could never truly triumph over courage and integrity. Others remained estranged, a reminder that not all hearts could be changed, even when confronted with undeniable truth. Her voice, once stolen, became a symbol far beyond her immediate surroundings. Poets, scholars, and musicians composed works celebrating the moment she spoke and the empire fell. Plays were enacted in town squares, retelling the story of the silenced girl who became a legend. Children acted out her journey, pretending to be the young woman reclaiming her voice, while elders recounted the meticulous planning, patience, and insight that led to her triumph. Every performance, every retelling reinforced the idea that power gained through oppression was never secure, and that the voice of truth, when unleashed, could transcend generations. She also traveled beyond the borders of the former empire, sharing her story with distant kingdoms and villages. Leaders who had relied on fear and secrecy listened, often trembling, and many implemented reforms to prevent the same fate from befalling their people. Her tale became a universal lesson. The mightiest empire, the wealthiest ruler, the most cunning conspirator, could be undone by a single voice armed with courage, wisdom, and unwavering resolve. Throughout her life she remained grounded, never forgetting the years of silence, humiliation, and solitude. She counseled others who had been oppressed, silenced, or undervalued, teaching them to harness the strength that lay within. She emphasized that patience was as important as courage, observation as critical as action, and that even small gestures could uncover profound truths. Her approach combined empathy with strategy, demonstrating that true power was not merely destructive but restorative, nurturing, and just. Communities began to celebrate a festival in her honor, marking the day her single word dismantled lies and restored integrity. Songs, dances, and rituals commemorated the resilience of the human spirit and the force of a voice reclaimed. Elders taught children not just to admire her but to internalize her lessons, that courage could be quiet or loud, subtle or overt, but its impact was always profound when rooted in truth. Her story endured in multiple forms: oral traditions, written chronicles, sculptures, and murals depicting her raising her hand and speaking the word that shook an empire. Each depiction captured not just the moment of power but the journey, the trials of losing her voice, the strategy and insight required to regain it, and the ethical responsibility that came with wielding such force. She became a symbol of balance, strength tempered by wisdom, courage guided by foresight, and action aligned with justice. Generations grew up hearing her story, and in each retelling children learned that silence did not equate to weakness, that oppression could be overcome through intelligence and resilience, and that a voice restored carried not just personal power but the potential to reshape communities and entire societies. Mothers taught daughters, fathers instructed sons, and elders shared her story in schools and communal gatherings. Her life became a template for navigating adversity, turning suffering into strategy, and transforming personal trials into collective lessons. Even in her later years she remained vigilant, ensuring that the principles she had established endured. She trained successors, mentored leaders and nurtured communities with her guidance. Her presence alone reminded people that courage and truth, once harnessed, could withstand any threat. Her voice was no longer merely sound. It was authority, wisdom and inspiration, a living embodiment of the power that had once toppled an empire. When she eventually passed, the empire and its people mourned, but her legacy endured more vividly than ever. Statues, monuments and archives preserved her story, but it lived strongest in the hearts of those who had learned that truth silenced was never lost, that courage could reclaim even the most oppressed, and that a single word, spoken at the right moment, could alter the course of history forever. Her name became timeless, her deeds immortal, and her voice, the voice once sold for gold, remained a symbol of justice, resilience, and the transformative power of reclaiming one's destiny.